And now I'm going to go to Ben West. Now, Ben is from Vancouver. And Ben, I'm going to ask you to keep it short because you've been up at these meetings and we've got about 30 speakers here, and you've really had a chance to speak to us. So please go ahead. And I just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak here. And some people have been before us in other times. So Ben, please go ahead.
Well, thanks again for the warm welcome, Lois.
Ben, you're always welcome. You know that. You always followed us. Thank you.
Just for the sake of clarity, I'm not here speaking as an individual from Vancouver, but I'm here as a representative of the Wilderness Committee, which is an organization with over 30,000 members across Canada, many of them right here in this area, as well as the rest of the Lower Mainland. My brief remarks today are going to be about climate change as it relates to waste incineration. I have a lot of concerns related to toxins as well, but I know others are going to speak to that. So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple slides to illustrate some of my concerns about climate change as it relates to waste incineration. Can I get the next slide, please? So the most climate-friendly approach to dealing with waste is to get the organics out of our landfills. When you're looking at a comparison between landfills and incineration, you're looking at methane that comes from organics breaking down in the landfill and comparing it to just the component of what's coming out of incinerators that comes from plastics being burned. The organic material isn't counted in the slides that were presented previously. So I believe the most climate-friendly approach is to look at composting. Next slide, please. The province of Nova Scotia, it should be mentioned, has actually banned organics in 1998, and it's been quite successful. I believe we could do the same. To the credit of some Metro directors, the City of Vancouver has proposed that we actually ban organics from both landfill and incineration. And Greg, I noticed in the paper recently that you said this is something that's being considered. So I just want to say that I think that's a great step in the right direction, and it would really change the way that this presentation looks if we took organics out of the mix. Next slide, please. What you're looking at here is actually a slide from a study that was done by the City of Vancouver, which looks at the implications of just the City of Vancouver's new composting program, which was launched on Earth Day this year. And what they show is that just the City of Vancouver's composting program alone would drastically change the composition of the waste, and therefore would increase the emissions from waste energy and reduce the emissions from landfill. That's just by 2016. It should be noted that this plan goes into 2030 and beyond. So you can really see clearly that just by pulling the organics out, at least in terms of dealing with climate change, you can have a really big impact. Next slide, please. If you don't count the carbon from burning organics, waste energy looks like the best option. This is a slide that I believe is on the other side of the room over there. It's been in the presentation in the past. And if you look at this, you see the emissions from landfill and you see the emissions from waste energy. It seems really clear. Waste energy seems like the better option. Next slide, please. But what you don't see is that the actual total amount of carbon that's coming out of an incinerator, actually 2/3 of that comes from the organics being burned. This is a point of some debate about whether the organics should be counted, although if you actually just look at the carbon and think to ourselves, well, we have to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, you can clearly see that waste incinerators actually produce more carbon emissions than even a coal-fired power plant. And that's worth noting because here in British Columbia, we don't burn coal for energy. In fact, most of our energy comes from clean sources already. So this would actually represent a major step in the wrong direction in terms of action on climate change. Next slide, please. So if you get the organics out of the waste stream, if we're looking at that last slide, all you'd be burning really is plastics, and regardless of how you count the emissions from a landfill, or sorry, from a waste incinerator, the slide would look the way that I put forward. If we banned organics from landfill and incinerator, you'd see that clearly waste incineration is worse than a coal-fired power plant. And what I'm proposing is that basically plastics are not an energy solution. They're not a source of fuel. In fact, they're a lousy source of fuel. They're worse than coal. It's been said that the amount of plastic right now that's in our landfill is something like the equivalent to 1 to 1.5 million barrels of oil that is being left in the ground. And as we're dealing with climate change, the question I ask is, should we be burning another 1 million to 1.5 million barrels of oil in this region and calling that a step in the right direction? I don't think it is. I see these plastics as a design problem. Much of the plastic that's in our landfill could be recycled right now, and the stuff that can't be is a challenge that we need to deal with that isn't a source of energy. Next slide, please. Also, I think it's important to note, though, that for every barrel of garbage that makes its way to either a landfill or an incinerator, there's many, many barrels of oil that went into the production of the material itself. If you're actually looking at the full life cycle of any product, next slide, please, you can see that there's a tremendous amount of energy that goes into the material being pulled from the ground, the material being manufactured, produced, and then in the consumption period, and then eventually in the waste. So really, when you're looking at these options, yes, with landfill and incineration, these are basically the same. But when you're looking at it and comparing it to recycling or composting options, there's a tremendous amount of extra energy use and a much bigger footprint that doesn't get taken into consideration. Next slide, please. So I said a little bit about recycling. It's worth noting that this isn't really just about paying more money to do the right thing. In fact, there's this great organization in the United States called Recycling Works, which has done some research into for every ton of garbage, how many jobs could be created with various different investment options. And it's clear that you can get 10 to 25 times as many jobs by investing in recycling and composting as you can by investing in landfill expansion or in incineration. Next slide, please. So really, to give the next generation a chance to do the right thing and lead the way, we need to not saddle this next generation with millions and millions of dollars in debt. It's been made clear that this is a $500 million initial investment without even taking into consideration the investment that would be needed for a district heating system. And that's a debt that we'll be paying for decades. In fact, some of the people that we're hearing from right now might not even be around to deal with that debt when it really comes up. So I think it really is important to note that this is a decision that's being made that has broad implications that go well beyond the here and now. Also, it's worth noting, if we're looking in terms of 20 years into the future, the 70% goal that you guys have is laudable, and I think it's fantastic. In fact, more often than not, I think Metro Vancouver has really been a force for doing the right thing in this region. You have a very aggressive goal in terms of action on climate change, which I think is quite respectable, but I think this plan contradicts it.
Thank you.
And I think it's important that we look beyond 2015. Your plan goes to 2030, but I only see a waste reduction goal that ends in 2015. So I want to know what happens by 2020, 2025, 2030.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And